morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, even sometimes with folks on this Zoom. It is lovely to see you all. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I edit the website My Jewish Learning, and this is, of course, the weekly Daf Yomi in review class, 30 minutes, reviewing what we learned in Talmud this week, now in Bava Batra. And as you know, this is taught by a wonderful rotating cast of teachers. And this morning we are joined by Dr. Sara Ronis. I think we're all in, Dr. Ronis, so go ahead and start.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see some folks letting us know where they're coming from in the chat. Please keep that coming. I am joining you from a rather toasty San Antonio, Texas. Now, this week we did a lot. This was a very rich week. We started out continuing our discussion of Job. And specifically, we talked really interestingly about the nature of Satan, the angel of death, and the evil inclination. We shifted from Job to talk about the value of daughters in our lives. We asked, what did it mean that Abraham was blessed with everything? What is everything in that context? We continued by talking about those who were truly incorruptible. And by incorruptible here, I mean both those who were particularly good and maybe even perfect, but also those whose bodies don't rot after death. Then we shifted back to talking about property law. We asked, how close can you build something next to someone else's structure? How close can you build something, even on your own land, if it's next to someone else's land where they might potentially build something in the future? We asked, how close to someone's wall can you put liquids of various kinds? The rabbi seemed particularly concerned about water and urine there. We had I'm going to call it a fun aside on ritual impurity and what kinds of organic matter count to reduce the dimensions of a window, right? What counts as a window blockage? We asked, what are the area and materials required for reinforcing and venting an oven? And I don't know about any of you, I have a friend going through some kitchen renovations right now, and that felt very relevant. We asked, what are the rules if you follow all of the laws about how to properly reinforce and vent an oven, but stuff still happens and you still cause damage, and are you liable if you've done all the right stuff? We read this beautiful story of Rabbi Yoshua ben Gamla creating local public schools for Jewish boys. We explored the kinds of rules that make you neighborly in a shared courtyard. You know, what kinds of jobs might be too much of a pain for your neighbors to have to hear or smell or live among. We asked about the rules of class sizes and whether it's better to have a teacher who has breadth or a teacher who has depth. Then we went back to property law and asked, how close to an existing business can you set up a competing business? And what does that mean for traveling salesmen? We then learned that really weird story of Rav Dimi's figs and the death of Rav Ada bar Abba that you read about yesterday. And we ended the week by talking about how close to someone else's window can you build a wall, right? Which essentially would block their ventilation and light. Now, we did a lot. And what I'd really love to do today is I wrote the piece on Daf Yomi on 16, and I was stuck between two different things I wanted to write about. And I figured, you know what, we're just going to do the other one now. So I'm going to share this handout with you. You should be able to see it. I'm also going to share my screen. So don't worry if you can't see the handout or if you have too many tabs up. Lord knows I've been there. But there was a piece of the Job story that I'm going to be honest with you, sort of charmed me in ways that I think only make sense if you really understand what's happening in Job. So what I'd like to do for probably about, I don't know, let's say 10 minutes, is go over the broad theological story of Job so that we can understand what the rabbis are doing with it. And this handout is longer than my usual handouts. This is really just for those of you who want to look at it later. I will talk you through what we're looking at. So don't worry about that. And Dr. Scheinerman, as folks are coming in, would you mind maybe just sharing the handout a couple more times? Great. Okay. So the book of Job, which is one of those books that we quote a lot but never actually read because it's not in the liturgical cycle, so it doesn't get read on any particular Jewish holiday, starts with, there was a man in the land of Uz named Job, and he was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil, right? So we have our narrator, and you read last week a debate about who wrote Job and when he lived and where Uz is, all of this good stuff. But the narrator tells us that this is a guy who is basically great, blameless, right? There is nothing to blame Job for. And if you think that's just the narrator talking, God also talks, right? God says, and I'm jumping here, right? You'll notice I put verse lines here, so please don't think this is going, we're reading the entire book of Job. The Lord said to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil, right? God even tells the Satan, I'm not calling him Satan, I'm calling him the Satan, right? You know why now after this week. God tells the Satan, yeah, he is completely blameless. He's the best guy on the earth, and he's done no wrong, right? And we know the Satan says, yeah, but like, would he really if things went rough? And then in chapter 2, after the Satan starts to cause trouble for Job with God's permission. Now, if you see where my cursor is, God says again to Job, right? He says to him, there's no one like him, to the Satan, there's no one like him on earth, blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. He still keeps his integrity, so you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason, right? So what's God saying here, right? God's saying Job didn't do anything wrong. Job has done nothing wrong, and bad stuff has happened to him because God has decided bad stuff can happen to him, not as a consequence of sin. Okay. All right. So that's the story so far. Now, in the book of Job, more bad stuff continues to happen to Job. And as is, I think, actually really beautiful, Job, I think very often we talk today about the crisis of male friendship and men don't have friends. Job has some great friends. Job has 3 friends who, when things go bad for him, his 3 friends come and they sit with him, they try to make him feel better. They're generally really good friends. One of Job's friends is a guy named Bildad the Shuhite. And Bildad, and all of the friends take turns essentially giving Job what they think are comforting speeches. So Job is sitting there and he's like, look, bad stuff is happening to me, and it makes no sense because I'm a good person. I've done nothing wrong, and this is unfair. And each of his friends gives a speech in turn, and I've just brought you a section from one of his speeches. This is Bildad's speech. Bildad the Shuhite said in reply, how long will you speak such things? Your utterances are a mighty wind, right? And they don't mean that in a good way. He means you're talking nonsense. Would God pervert the right? Will the Almighty pervert justice? If your sons sinned against him, he dispatched them for their transgression. But if you seek God and supplicate the Almighty, if you are blameless and upright, he will protect you and grant you grant well-being to your righteous home through though your beginning be small, in the end you will grow very great, right? So Bildad is saying to him, if bad stuff happened to you, it's because you sinned. If your sons were killed, it's because they sinned. And so your solution here is to identify the sin, repent from the sin, because only if you don't sin will God give you all the good stuff. Okay. Right, so Job is saying, I didn't do anything wrong. Why is all this happening to me? And Bildad and all of the other friends are saying, no, God is just. All bad stuff happens as a result of sin. So if bad stuff has happened to you, you have actually sinned and you need to repent, and that's how the bad stuff is going to stop. All right, let's keep going. I promise this will all make sense related to the daf. Job eventually, after hearing all of his friends' speeches, he gives a reply. And his reply is sharp. Job said in reply, this is chapter 16, so you see we're really moving fast today. I have often heard such things. You are all mischievous comforters. Have windy words no limit? What afflicts you that you speak on? I would also talk like you if you were in my place, right? What is he saying? You guys are the windy ones, right? You're the ones who are speaking nonsense. And I get it, because if I hadn't experienced what I've experienced, I might also think, oh yeah, everything is just in the world, right? But Job says that's just not true. And if we scroll down just a little bit to further on in the speech, he says, where are we? I have been on trouble, and he broke me into pieces. He took me by the scruff and shattered me. He set me up as his target, right? God broke me. You guys are telling me that this is all because I sinned. I'm telling you I didn't sin. I'm telling you you're full of nonsense. And I'm telling you this whole thing has broken me. Okay. So most of the book of Job is a set of speeches between the friends and Job. But starting in chapter 38, God chimes in, and we get God speaking out of the whirlwind or out of the tempest. This really powerful image. And God ultimately responds. And God's response, you might say, would be, no, I am really just, and you're wrong. Or you're right, I'm unjust. But neither of those is God's response. God responds, who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I will ask, and you will inform me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Speak if you have understanding. Do you know who fixed its dimensions, or who measured it with a line? Onto what were its bases sunk? Who set its cornerstone when the morning sun, wait, I lost it? It just disappeared. Stars sang together, and all the divine beings shouted for joys. Who closed the sea behind doors when it gushed forth out of the womb, etc. All right, what's God's response? Who the heck are you? Were you there when the earth was created? Are you pretending you understand how the world works? Right? This is a technical term in sort of religious studies world, the appeal to sovereignty. God says, you are not God. You do not understand. You were not there at the beginning. You do not understand how the world works. Right? Now, you'll notice it's not really a response about justice. It's why are you trying to question me and the way that I run things? Not because the way that I run things are the way you think I should run things. Right? And that's kind of an interesting thing. So we have the friends debating, is all bad stuff a result of sin, or does bad stuff sometimes just happen? You have Job saying, I didn't sin, bad stuff just sometimes happens. And God saying, whether or not that's true, I'm the one in charge and you don't get my plan, right? Because you can't fundamentally, as a human being, understand the God's eye view of these things. So which friends won, right? Who won this debate? That gets us to chapter 42, where we actually get the answer, right? After the Lord had spoken all these words to Job, his God's big speech out of the whirlwind, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, that's one of Job's three friends, I am incensed at you and your two friends, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as did my servant Job. Who's right that actually bad stuff happens, and it's not because you deserved it? God says, Job is right. You're wrong. That actually Job is blameless, and bad stuff just happens, and he experiences that as completely unjust. Now, from a God's eye view, it's part of a plan that human beings can't understand. But the question, right, that's what the two preceding chapters really are saying. But from the perspective of human beings, bad stuff happens and people don't deserve it. And if you're the person who's like, oh, well, everything happens for a reason and it's all part of, you need to repent because if bad stuff happened to you, then it's because, whatever, then you're wrong. You're just wrong. And I think many of us know, and I'm seeing this in the chat, many of us know or have experienced going through a hard time, and a friend thinks they're being really helpful and says the absolute wrong thing. Like, oh, well, you need to figure out what you did wrong, right? Or God forbid somebody gets a medical diagnosis and someone else says to them, well, I told you not to eat gluten, or, whatever, take your probiotics. Right? Blaming people when stuff goes bad for them, as opposed to just saying like, yeah, sometimes bad stuff just happens. And maybe there is some ultimate divine plan, but we don't have the capacity to understand it. Because God says, unless you were there at the beginning when I created the world, you're not going to get the God's eye view. Sorry. Okay, so that is all, the entire book of Job. But you'll notice that today is not part of a series on the book of Job in review. It's the Daily Dose of Talmud week in review. So all of that context was just to get us to a piece of the daf for this week from 16b. Okay. We just did the book of Job in 10 minutes. I feel like you should feel very accomplished this morning, if nothing else. All right, so the book of Job picks up on what God says to the Satan. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Rava says, he did not sin with his lips, but he sinned in his heart. What did he say? Right, so, he didn't sin verbally, but he sinned in his heart, in his head, in his thinking. What did he say to himself? The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. He covers the face of its judges. If not he, then who is it? Right? That the world, he sinned by thinking that God gave the world to the wicked. Rava said, Job sought to turn the bowl upside down, right? To invert the natural order of things, which is that good, right? That God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. And Abaye says to him, no, Job was only referring to Satan, right? The Satan tries to pervert the world order, but he wasn't suggesting that God does. Okay, so we just read the entire book of Job, and I would argue, in my mind correctly, that largely the book of Job is about the fact that sometimes bad stuff happens and it's not your fault. And that actually God says, you don't understand how the world works, and so you're going to experience bad stuff that you will experience as unjust. And that's true, right? Unjust, unfair, reasonless, and that is how you're going to experience it. And then Rava says, yeah, but he actually really did deserve it. Right? Almost like, I read this and I was like, did they read the same book of Job as I did? And in fact, it continues. So we go on to another verse in the book of Job. This is Job 10:7. Rava says, Job sought to exempt the whole world from judgment. Right? Job sought to exempt, right? Basically say that nobody can be punished, is punished for evil. Job said before God, Master of the universe, you created the ox with split hooves, meaning, right, and therefore it's kosher, and you created the donkey with closed hooves, which means it's not. You created the Garden of Eden, and you created Gehenna, and you created righteous people, and you created wicked people. Who can restrain you, right? If people are bad, it's because you made them that way. If people are good, it's because you made them that way, right? So he's describing what we might think of as radical predestination. Everybody's, this is very Calvinist for those of you who studied the Protestant Reformation, right? This idea that everybody's entire personality, actions are set by God at the right before they're born. And so you shouldn't really punish anyone for being exactly who you made them. Right, so Job is saying, so you can't, right, there is no judgment. You can't judge us for stuff if you've already said it. And how did Job's friends answer him? You do away with fear and impair devotion before God. Yeah, the Holy One, blessed be He, created the evil inclination, but God also created the Torah as an antidote. So you always have a choice to improve your predestined lot, and you can, and if you choose not to, then God will punish you. Okay. So I'm curious now, what are your thoughts about these two statements by Rob? And we can look at the chat, or if folks want to put up their hand, I'm sure we can find you.
Can you see the chat, Dr. Ronis? Do you want me to read to you?
I am scrolling through, but there's a lot. So if you've noticed
Okay.
some. If you notice something that you want us to talk about, please let me know.
I apologize. I was slightly distracted pulling up articles on My Jewish Learning on Job. We did a whole project on Job many years ago, and I published a lot of I think they're interesting articles on Job. But Lynn has a comment here about Rava. Oh, and Lynn, I also see your hand is up. So you know what?
Let's find Lynn.
You come ask your question in person.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in our study group last week. Remember how they ascribed the authorship of Job possibly to Moses?
Mhm.
And we were trying to figure out why. And we thought that it must be, if they ascribed it to Moses, it must be a really incredibly important message for us. And so we thought that it was just maybe that living in a righteous way and making righteous choices is, and expecting something material, to come from it, is not part of our theology. You should just live righteous and follow the mitzvot for their own sake. And so that's kind of what we thought maybe this was trying to say, or at least some of us thought that.
Yeah, the idea that the idea that we do this to be righteous. Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful point. Thank you. I'm seeing John Haddon has a bunch of things to say in the chat. Can we find John?
Hi, John. You're on the spot.
Yes, I'm here.
Amazing.
How are you?
Good. How are you? Can you tell us what you were thinking?
Can you read back what I wrote?
So I was seeing here, the reward of living a good and moral life is that you're living a good and moral life, period.
Yeah, I was thinking mitzvah goreret mitzvah. I mean, there's no explanation of why righteous people suffer. Good people suffer, bad people suffer. Good people prosper, bad people prosper. And my point is that it's a comment on us that we don't understand the things that happen to us. And we certainly are not consoled by anybody trying to give us an explanation, something that you said earlier. What you want is to validate your suffering. I share your suffering. I feel bad for you. I wish I could do something for you. Know that I love you. I think that's consoling. But surely trying to come up with an explanation doesn't make any sense. And it's interesting. Someone said Job might have been written by Moses. I'm thinking about Moses' life. Poor guy tries to save a slave from a taskmaster, and the slave blames Moses. Who are you to rule over us? And then Moses, poor guy, 40 years leading the Israelites, doesn't get his ultimate dream of getting into the promised land. That's bad stuff happening to good people. That's the story of our lives as well.
Yes, thank you. Maybe let's find one more person. I see Aisha Coleman.
Can I respond to John just real quickly with a book recommendation? Because I think what you said was really interesting there. Sorry, Dr. Ronis, for inserting myself, but I never thought about this, what you said before, but it actually makes a whole lot of sense to me. Moses is somebody who also suffers enormously, and if anyone deserves to get into the promised land, right? That would be
Moses.
Right. And he is, and so like, who deserves more than anyone to see that? And Harold Kushner many years ago wrote a book called
When Bad Things Happen, not Why Bad Things Happen.
Well, he wrote that too, right? He wrote that too, but he also wrote a book about Moses called Overcoming Life's Disappointments, because that really does happen to all of us, right? Like, terrible things happen to us that we don't necessarily deserve if we are, lucky to live long enough.
We think about the people on October 7th in Israel, Holocaust. I remember reading a book by Father Edward Flannery called The Anguish of the Jews. And he said in the book, one fact, anti-Semitism has nothing to do with Jewish misconduct. I'll never, ever forget that line. Has nothing to do with Jewish misconduct. People want to hate, they're going to hate.
Yes, I think, and I think that this is a really complicated piece. And I'm seeing in the chat some people saying, wait, but in parts of Numbers and Deuteronomy, God says, if you do good, I will reward you, and if you do bad, I will punish you. And then we have something like the book of Job, right? And God says in various places in the book of Judges that the people sinned, and so he turned the nations against them. And then we have all of these other places where actually, like, the expression, which I will not say, is, something happened, right? Stuff happens.
Crap happened.
And
I'll say it.
and right, that's the way of it. And I think I'm going to just bring in Aisha Coleman. Let me just read what you wrote, Aisha, because we're
Thank you for
tight
hearing
on
me out.
time. Yeah, of course. There is so much, right? Aisha wrote, there is so much here also about the nature of suffering to me, really even beyond why it happens, to whom, but more of just why suffering has to even exist, and we cannot understand, right? And so I think, sorry. And I think there's a real, the book of Job is a weird book, because it's a book which is, in some ways, I would say, the most theological book in the entire Tanakh, in some ways. Not in that every book of Tanakh reveals the nature of God in some way, obviously, but in that it is an explicit set of discussions about the nature of God. Is more what I mean by that there, right? Theology meaning the words we use to talk about God, right? So there's a lot of talking about the nature of God in the book of Job. And I read the book of Job, and there's a very famous Reddit thread where somebody sort of talks about the book of Job as arguing for the injustice of the world as experienced by humans. I read the book of Job in one way. And then we come to the Talmud, and the Talmud, the Rava and the rabbis on that discussion read it in the complete opposite way. Okay, fine, he didn't sin, but he must have actually sinned, right? He must have actually sinned. And if he didn't sin out loud, then he sinned cognitively in some way by thinking something about God that is untrue. And not only did he think something that is untrue, but the friends were right and he was wrong. And so what I want to maybe leave us with then is thinking about what this daf really invites us to do is to think about our own relationship to the Torah and to what we read, and to think about how it might have meant one thing in its own context, but then in a new context with new people having new experiences, you might come to it with a different set of questions, with a different set of assumptions, and come up with what reads as literally the opposite answer. You might come to it with more questions than you have answers, or you might come to it with answers that you're kind of trying to slot into existing questions. And so to me, what that discussion of the book of Job really highlights is that meaning is made in relationship. That we make meaning, we apply things to our life in a relationship between the text and between our tradition and between ourselves. And that meaning that we make may not be the meaning that was originally intended. That may not be the meaning that our tradition thought we would come to, 1,500 years ago when they didn't know our world. Or it might be exactly the meaning of ancient authors. But all of those only emerge in a relationship that we are central to, right? A relationship means we have to show up to make that meaning. And I will leave you with that and wish you a wonderful week of the daf and a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Dr. Ronis. Thank you to all of you for the discussion and the questions and the comments. And we will see you, of course, in your inbox tomorrow morning and in this space in exactly 1 week's time. Thank you, everybody.